So, Mark, I don't know about you, but when I got into this business, communicating news to employees was what employee communication was all about. True of you?
Yeah, exactly right. Often it was a one size fits all. Hit that button. Now everybody knows. It was really simple.
Yeah, my first job was with an energy company. Arco doesn't exist anymore. It was acquired after I left by British Petroleum. Interesting story. I was told that one of the folks that I knew who was still there, in fact, it was Dave Orman who ran the department, said somebody with BP who had been with another company that they had acquired asked him if they knew how you pronounced his company's name. I think it was Amoco. And Dave said, no, I don't, how do you pronounce it? He goes, BP. The Amoco is silent. Yeah.
Clever. I like it.
Yeah, just give you a heads up about what it's going to be like. But
Yeah.
no, we had a newspaper. It was sometimes 8 pages, sometimes 16 pages. It was every week, every Friday. It was delivered to all 55,000 employees in the company. So everybody got the news. Everybody got the same news. Yeah. And today, there are organizations that do internal communications that don't actually have a news vehicle. They don't communicate the news. They've shifted entirely to this proactive strategic approach to communication.
Yeah, we may have been separated at birth because my first corporate job was also in an energy company. And our communication to employees was a monthly magazine, anywhere from 32 to, I don't know, 38 pages, whatever it was. And to your point, everybody got the exact same news and information at the same time. And there really wasn't a sense of urgency. Like, communicating news was what we decided was news that they needed to know and when they needed to know it. Clearly, things have changed considerably since then. With the advent of social media and immediate communication. And of course, there used to be kind of this wall between internal and external. You get away with some things. Not possible anymore.
Welcome to On the Same Page, the podcast that helps organizations communicate with their employees, with your hosts, Shel Holtz and Mark Dollins.
Yeah, I remember when I was at Arco, Dave brought Roger Dupree in to speak to us. I believe he was with Xerox at the time, but Roger was pushing this whole notion of proactive communication. You're communicating in order to set employees up for what's coming, to ensure that they're aligned, to ensure that they know what they need to know in order to understand and support whatever is about to happen. And everybody on the Arco staff, with the exception of graphic design type people, had a daily newspaper background. We were all newspaper reporters. That's what they wanted, was people who could report the news. You know? And there was pushback against what Roger said. You mean we're not going to report when the Trans-Alaska Pipeline terminus station blows up and kills 3 employees? We're not going to report that? You know, you do need to report that, but you also need to be proactive. But today, let's talk about news.
Yep, indeed. It's the how we communicate news today that I think is so critical. And while one size doesn't fit all in communicating the news, I believe that a strategic filter through which you look at the news and how you report it is pretty important.
Yeah. Do you want to report absolutely everything that goes on? I mean, even in the world of public journalism, you don't report everything that goes on.
What is news, right? It's the most basic question.
News?
What is news? What makes people interested, and what's going to be aha or yo hum, whatever. I'm not interested in that.
And of course, what news is in an organization and an internal comms context is not necessarily the same definition we would apply to news at the Los Angeles Times or the Wall Street Journal. So
remember all the filters you were supposed to run through in journalism school, proximity, timeliness, relevance, all those things some of those things are quite, applicable to this. And then some things are not quite as, especially for global companies. When we think about proximity, it's like, well, proximity is my company's name and what's involved there. So to that extent, but it may not be a geographic proximity. So some relevance.
Yeah, some relevance, but what's relevant for an employee in Paris who is working in sales is not necessarily relevant to an employee in Peoria working in a manufacturing facility. Now, back when we started, you with your monthly magazine and me with my weekly newspaper, the technology limited what we could do in terms of tailoring the news to different audiences. Today, that's actually drop dead easy.
Right, exactly. Repackaging and repurposing it for the channel that you choose.
Right. So you can get the news to the people who would be interested in it, whose jobs are going to be affected by it, and not bother somebody who's going to look at that and say, why are they sending this to me? This has nothing to do with me.
Right. So tell me how when you're faced with a quote unquote news item, Shel, for your organization, what filters do you run it through and how do you make decisions on how strategically you're going to treat it or not?
Well, we have profiles that we have established. Now, I've been wanting to do profiles forever, but we don't have the resources or the time to do this right. And I was at a conference where Andrea Greenhouse was speaking, and she talked about, I think you were at the same conference. It was the PRSA Internal Comms Conference in Atlanta. And Andrea talked about the 3 profiles that she likes, which is hard to convince, hard to reach, and everyone else. So I kind of blew that out. I think we have 5 that are based on those, but take it a little further. But that's one filter that we put. Is this somebody that we really needs to be convinced of this, or is this somebody who just needs to be aware?
Needs to know, right?
Yeah. So yeah, that's one. And then the filter is, what does it reinforce? So we tell stories that reinforce our core values. We have 6 core values. I think I could actually name them if I was pressed to. We have a strategic plan that has 4 planks. We have a purpose statement that is our higher calling. And what we try to do with our storytelling, our news reporting, is to reinforce those. We're going to tell the stories that demonstrate that we are true to our values, that we are, in fact, making decisions that are consistent with the planks of the strategic plan and so forth.
And that it's consistent with, to your earlier point, your purpose. I think that's where a lot of organizations really kind of miss the boat. Even when they have legitimate good news, like, hey, we're launching a new product, we're acquiring this company, whatever. And they say, here are the mechanics of how it's all going to work. But they miss the opportunity to say, this is how this supports our purpose, our whole reason for being. And if there is a specific strategy that it connects to, hey, we're saying we're going to expand into these adjacencies, which is our strategic priority for the next 3 to 4 years. And look at how this actually does that for us. It's surprising to me sometimes when you actually dig in just below the news and go, I wonder why anybody would care about this, because there is no connection to a purpose or mission or to a strategy. And I think that's where we as internal comms folks really have to be thinking about the application, the relevancy to those stakeholders.
Yeah. And obviously there are going to be news stories that don't have a clear connection to one of those, but they're so big that you have to convey them anyway. We were talking before we started recording about announcing a new CEO that may be happening because your succession plan has kicked in. Your existing CEO is retiring. It could be that your existing CEO dropped dead of a heart attack or was removed by the board under questionable circumstances.
I think this actually ties to what we were talking about a little bit on our last podcast, which is around change and change management. And a lot of, I think, the way that we treat news is it's not a one and done. We have to look at the impact, right? What's the aftermath of this? A new CEO could signal entirely new direction for executive leadership and other really high priorities for the company. So if you're going to announce the news, you need to put a little bit of thought into, is there something else that comes immediately behind this or fairly quickly that we also ought to be thinking about? So it's funny because you go, well, how do we communicate news? Well, that's the easy question, in my opinion. It's like you decide, is it news? And then let's figure out how we get it to the internal stakeholders that we want. But if we're not thinking, and then what? I think we're going to miss a big opportunity for a smaller percentage of those bigger news items, like, a new CEO or a big acquisition or something that really significant seismic change in where the company or the industry is going. So it's not a simple answer to a question of like, how do we communicate the news? It's how do we communicate the news, and then what happens after that we've got to be thoughtful about.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is where there were challenges in hiring newspaper reporters to come in and become internal communicators, because in public journalism, the reason you're communicating this is because it happened and it's relevant to the people who live in this area.
Sure. Right.
that doesn't fly in internal comms. You have to look at what it is that you want from employees based on the fact that they've been made aware of this news. There was this model, I don't know if you knew Ed Robertson. He
Yep.
was at FedEx, and he developed this, had a horrible name. It was the Pyramid of Communication Quality. It sounded like
Rolls
something
off
from
the tongue.
it's like something from a 1940s textbook, but it's based loosely on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what he said was that most executives and the communicators they hire think they start at the top of the pyramid, which is, what do you want from me as a result of my having read this? And you actually have to go through some steps first. It has to satisfy logistical requirements. And a great example of a failure of logistics is, we sent you the news. The news is about a change in benefits providers, and we got it to you a week after the benefits enrollment deadline. There's a logistical failure.
Gee, thanks. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
After that, it has to capture your attention. And again, what's going to capture the attention of somebody who goes down into a mine and somebody who sits in the boardroom? Two different things.
Yeah.
Once it has your attention, you ask, what does this have to do with me? Why should I pay attention, and do things improve for me as a result of that? And then finally, once you've satisfied that requirement, you can get to, okay, what do you want me to think, believe, or do?
It's interesting. You make that point about the benefits being communicated, the changes being communicated after all they've been executed. And it really raises also the issue of timing and sequencing, that there are sometimes some advantages to thinking through the advantages of like sequencing how you're communicating news. And I'll give you a quick example of something I just had a conversation with a dear friend about. There's a major symphony orchestra in this country that just decided earlier this year not to renew the contract of its conductor. And the board of directors, CEO certainly has the right and the responsibility of making that call and the selection. But communicating that news really didn't happen, it appears, with a lot of thought to internal stakeholders, namely the musicians that represent this orchestra. In fact, they learned that their conductor would not be returning at the same time press release went out to everybody else. Well, the problem with that is that these employees, these musicians said, we kind of like this guy, and so we're going to get behind him, and now we're going to mount a campaign to save his job and get it back. And so, I saw them last night. They were wearing red carnations. I'm like, what is that all about? And my friend explained to me what was going on. But the other issue is that they're all part of the musicians union, right? And so they can organize, and they now have some clout in being able to at least communicate in a way that's organized. And there really wasn't also some thought given to the sequencing of, what would the outgoing conductor be able to say or do? And apparently the outgoing conductor took advantage of that and decided to communicate some things on, in this case, his own. So when we don't ask the right questions, hey, we're brought to the table as internal communicators, and we get the press release, what's going on, but let's talk about the implications for internal stakeholders. What are the rules of engagement for this outgoing CEO, or conductor, relative to what he can and how he can communicate? What's the timing on when this is going out? Who's being notified and when? What can we offer to help make this process go a little more smoothly for everyone, including our internal stakeholders and our musicians who clearly care about this person? So it's just another example of communicating the news is a simple thing to do in concept. But if we don't think about the aftermath of communicating that news and its impact, we may be creating our own problems, quite frankly.
Yeah, they didn't do the incoming conductor any favors either, did they?
Well, good luck finding someone who wants to walk into that situation. So that's going to be a challenge.
No kidding. But this gets to this argument that I keep hearing, that there is no longer a distinction between internal and external communication. The lines have blurred. You send out the press release, it gets published, everybody's going to read the same thing. Why do we need to communicate separately? And I think this action that's been taken by the musicians speaks to that. This is exactly why. I say this all the time, but Roger Dupree refers to employees as informed insiders, and that's why you need to treat them differently.
Right. I mean, we've seen the rise in employee activism, right? They get behind, and rightly so in many cases, an issue or a topic. And all of a sudden, it's not just them, complaining to their bosses. You got a shareholder proposal that now that's been, authored by activists, employees. So this is why this is not a nice thing to do. It is like a really important central thing to do, is to think about the aftermath of news and how we communicate it.
Or 20,000 employees walking out. That's another
Oh, there's
potential.
that. Yeah. Well, yes. I think there's also talk of a strike, by the way, on this other, situation I was talking
Oh, really?
about.
Okay. Because, there was certainly the case of Wayfair, which was selling its furniture to these ICE detention facilities.
Right. Yes.
That led employees to revolt. You had Google, which had the 20,000 employees walk out, the coordinated labor action. They fired it was actually the communicator who organized all that. She now has a book out about the whole thing. So,
all right. Well, I'm guessing they're making more money off of that than their former job. So just a guess.
Yeah, that's true. But I'm not sure that firing her had the positive impact that Google might have thought that
exactly.
it would.
Yeah. So, but I do think that also thinking through, are there champions? So it's a change management concept, right? Are there champions that we need to engage or pre-engage to help communicate this news, right? So it's not, to your point, it's not just the press release or the announcement in the internal house organ, whatever it is. It's like, if this is big or significant news, let's pay the right attention to it and equip the right people to help deliver that message in ways that a digital document or a printed document, so context, feeling, engaging people is a far more effective way of saying we care about the way this organization responds and reacts and engages with this news than here it is, talk to you later.
Right. And I know organizations that even have mapped out their influence networks within the organization and tap into the right network for the right kind of communication.
Right. Not to mention the derailers. So we need to know both ends of the spectrum, like who's going to help us and who's going to really be the voice of the opposition. Maybe we don't need, or we could perhaps even bring over to a different way of thinking.
Right. I think another drawback from this transition from newspaper reporter to internal communicator is that we think that every article that is shared, and in fact, all the news that is shared, needs to be a work of journalism, because that's all there was for us before, right? And it doesn't anymore. We have multiple channels and multiple ways of getting information out.
Yeah, and those channels are designed to handle information in different ways. Some handle like a boatload of stuff, and some are really, here's your X number of characters that you can communicate. And if you want more, you can dive deeper. That's the beauty of a lot of the digital stuff that we're doing, right? But it isn't one size fits all, both in terms of like the content of the end user, but also the channels that we're using to reach them.
Right. I mean, some of it can be visual. I can tell a story with a photo and a caption and not need anything else if the story can be contained there.
Yeah. Agreed. Completely.
The other question is who's telling the story. I saw data recently. Can't remember, it might have been Gallagher, but it was one of the internal comms surveys, might have been Populo, but said that people are deciding what news they're going to pay attention to based on who sent it. So was it the CEO? Was it their manager? Was it the internal comms team? When you are advising your clients, is the source of the news a consideration?
Of course it is. It's like whose voice matters. It's like, hearing from the CEO, it ought to be a pretty important, piece of news if you're going to use the CEO's voice. Otherwise, you misuse the CEO's voice and nobody pays attention to it over time because it's over leveraged, right? In other cases, hey, maybe a subject matter expert who's got that credibility, or even a third party to say something about your news is a really great way of getting people to pay attention to it. Oh, I hadn't heard from this person in a while. This is a pretty senior person, whatever. Or this is somebody that I know who's really got a great deal of expertise in this topic or this area. So I'm going to pay more attention to it. So again, it's all situational, but it requires us to think what we're paid to do is to think about whose voice matters in this and who's going to, how are our stakeholders going to react to it. And by the way, that's still not a one size fits all. It could be a voice really works well in this part of the organization or delivers this type of message, but a second voice or even a third voice sometimes offers a great deal of credibility and acceptance to the topic of the day that is news. So, we shouldn't limit ourselves to say only one voice. And in many cases, it's not a big deal news. It's like one voice is plenty. But in others, you know what? Have some analysts talk about the power of this combination of your company and some other company. Now you're starting to get to some interesting credibility for based off whose voices you choose to help share the news and the story around it.
Yeah, and I know there are organizations out there overcompensating on this too. I had a client back in my consulting days who never wrote a news article. They didn't have a vehicle for communicating news. Everything came from an executive, and they ghost wrote all of that. And I said, really, you don't have a voice of the company that you can share really, ground level basic news reporting on? And nope, everything comes from an executive.
Wow.
So
that's unfortunate.
Sure.
Yeah, we talk about brand personality and all the components of what makes a company a brand and a brand a company. Those are opportunities to leverage that company voice without a human being necessarily being attached to it. So it's situational. We have to be thoughtful about it.
Yeah. Also, the targeting, I want to come back to that for just a minute, because not only do we have the opportunity to get news that is relevant into the hands of the people for whom it's relevant, but we can get really hyper-local with this stuff now, too. I'm a big fan of Jeff Jarvis, and I read his book about what we need to do with news in order to make the news industry relevant and profitable. And I think he's spot on. He says, if you're going to be relevant to me with the news, you don't tell me what's going on in my city. You tell me what's going on in my block.
Exactly right.
I want to know, is there a road closure that's going to keep me from getting to work? I live maybe 2 miles from the Concord Pavilion, a big performing arts venue, and our main drag, Ignacio Valley Road, is frequently backed up because there's a concert. Tell me that this road, which is 2.5 blocks from me, is going to be backed up from 1 o'clock until midnight.
Yeah, I need a loaf of bread and milk. I don't want to spend an hour and a half getting there. So do your part as a good community neighbor and tell me the news that's impactful to me.
Right. And we have the ability to extract this information. And we could do this, AI can help us automate this process to a certain extent with some of this content.
Right. Let's use it. Yeah. I love that.
And get that local information to the people who need it. We could talk about news all day, but
I know
we've been at this for a while, so let's wrap it up there. Any last thoughts, Mark?
Other than being strategic in how we communicate news is a really critical component, I think, for any employee communicator's role. It isn't a one size fits all. And I think, to your point, using the tools that we have available to us to make it hyper local, to present it in the right voice, to think about sequencing, and really importantly, to think about the aftermath of the news. As I sum this all up, I think are the critical elements that we need to be thinking about and acting on.
Yeah, and maybe we could talk another time about how you measure the impact of the news that you have communicated. But
yes, my favorite topic is outcomes versus outputs. So yes,
that's right. Yeah, and we're only guessing that we're being impactful if we're not measuring to see if we got the result that we wanted.
Amen, brother.
Talk to you in a couple of weeks, Mark.
Sounds great, Shel. Have a good one.